going to use this phrase, a magic mirror. As an artist, and I'll tell you my story, I got pulled into a field that wasn't exactly mine through my devotion to art and through my recognition of good art. It was my job for 20 years. It's what drove me insane. It made me phase out of regular society, being a decent member of society. I was driven insane by working in this place that was the information stream of the beehive. And it was a lie factory, and it was entirely colored by political impulses and commercial impulses. So they would take this thing that pretended to be truth. They would have people look you right in the eye and wear suits that indicate that they're telling the truth, wear conservative hairdos. And they would lie to you and give you information that would compel you to go out and participate in the either political landscape or the consumer landscape and think what they wanted you to think. And it wasn't necessary for you to think the truth. It was necessary for you to think these certain thoughts that were convenient for government or for certain corporate crimes to continue to take place, and to keep us from acknowledging the unbelievable number of crimes that are done against us. So that message and that model and that cosmology is a map of reality for anybody who doesn't understand that, is conducive to this operating system we have right now, where corporations are selling things we don't need, continually removing freedoms from us and constantly truncating us into this mental box. In times past, before the printing press, oddly enough, when books were architecture, when language was symbolism, it's a kind of transcultural language that I can't read Italian, I can't read Thai, which is a problem because I live in Thailand. But everyone can look at pictures. Everyone knows what a bird is. Everyone knows what an eyeball is. And so there's this strange language of symbolism from the past, and it speaks to us in a completely different way. It speaks the way that your mind is organized. So there was a book this is the last thing we'll set up before we can really dive into the subject matter. There's an amazing book, my new Bible for this last year, a book by Ian McGilchrist called The Master and His Emissary. The Master and His Emissary. And the entire book is a study of our left and right hemispheres, and how in the 70s, we kind of set off on a direction about the left hemisphere does this, the right hemisphere does this. And it was an incomplete model, and it kind of fell into jingoism, and everybody saying, well, you're left brain, you're right brain. And nobody really knew what that meant. And so the whole idea kind of fell into the ridicule bin and didn't mean much to people. And then this person, Ian McGilchrist, who's also a real good friend of Rupert Sheldrake's, an incredibly intelligent man, a teacher at, I believe, Oxford, reconciled the model and really brought a scientific fine-tooth comb to this model that we have two hemispheres. They're physically different shapes. They're best thought of as like Republicans and Democrats sitting across the aisle. They're checks and balances. So very much like a bird brain, one hemisphere for a bird is all about smaller and focusing on details. Is that a piece of grain or is that a piece of rice? At the same time, the other hemisphere, which needs to be operating simultaneously, the other hemisphere is scanning the big picture, looking at the sky for predators swooping down. And you have to be able to perform both micro and macro operations to stay alive. The human brain is bifurcated, quite separate, and serves the same function. You have inverse complementary functions. So there's very few things that are only left brain, only right brain. People aren't really left brain or right brain exclusively. But in the modality and the way they relate to life, you can take a very left hemisphere approach, which is standard in Western culture. The left hemisphere operation is typified by data points. Like if you have a list of names, if you have a list of data points that don't really mean anything collectively, but they're just individual points of data. They're rote knowledge, learning the details without understanding why they're happening. Linear hierarchical lists are the domain of the left hemisphere. Our language, the English language, very left hemisphere. It's a linear stream. The right hemisphere, on the other hand, is much less used in the Western culture, and it tends to be the domain of artists and poets, and it's associative. So whereas the left hemisphere's lists of unrelated facts in no particular order, When something moves from knowledge to wisdom, as they say, you can know a bunch of things about the trains, but you don't really understand the trains. And at a certain point, if you live around them enough, you can take all these data points, fit them into an associative tree, the map of meaning, or this flow chart of where all the pieces of information go. And so the right hemisphere is knowing. Collecting data is and knowing a bunch of unrelated facts that don't mean anything or do anything to you is the domain of the left hemisphere. Understanding that data is the domain of the right hemisphere. So there's a language that specifically speaks to our right hemisphere, and it's not in common use right now. One of the indicators that we're not as smart as we used to be. All of Western society is left hemisphere dominated. It's very related to facts, but the right hemisphere is much less commonly used. And in this post-industrial age, in this industrial age of mechanism and mechanized things and assembly lines and whatnot, if you're working on a car lot or a car assembly line in Detroit, and you show up to work and you go, you know what, today I'm going to go a different way. I'm going to shake it up. I'm going to be creative today. I've got I'm full of beans. I'm going to build this car a different way. I'm going to put all the wheels up on top just because it looks cool and I'm creative. I'm going to do something different today, and it means something to me symbolically. There's a lot, in fact, you could say the lion's share of jobs and requirements to keep society running are not conducive to people who show up and are creative every day. If I went to the surgeon and he said, look, I know you want a chin job, but think of this, one big eye, or something like that. There's lots of jobs that we don't want people to be creative. We just don't want creativity. We don't want you grandstanding. We don't want you making up new rules as you go. On the other hand, to disable that in a person, you can imagine the terrible long-term effects that has. So in society, we have these kind of stratified identities where there are artists and creatives, poets, comedians live and die by this matrix or this web of meaning in the right hemisphere. Symbolism in art, but especially hieroglyphs and the language. So the language of the Chinese ideograms, the Japanese kanji. I cannot speak to what's going on in Thailand with this language. I don't know. I can't even fathom it. But you can see that the language typifies this mode of thinking in the West and in the East. And every time that we start thinking in the West that we're superior, you just have to spend a little time studying the language and the mode of communication in the East and from the past to understand that we are not the smartest we've ever been. And there were times in the past where people and the art and the building spoke to this right hemisphere. So instead of giving you data points and information, I'm giving you wisdom. Wisdom results from taking data points and collecting them in a structure. So the left hemisphere collects facts, the right hemisphere produces wisdom in these structural dynamic models of the world, and that's how we learn. So as I was studying and simply trying to put into words what was so strange and attractive about Egypt, I started discovering the horrible, unthinkable idea that, this sounds more like science than the religion that we've been told it is. So now I want to bring up this idea. Speaking of Richard Dawkins said an amazing thing. Oh, okay. Here's an amazing thing. The most beautiful couple of words that have graced my head recently have to do with this idea of the capstone. The capstone is this Masonic term and a term from architecture. And what it basically means is what's the top node idea? What's the governing idea? Or what is this thing? So the magic mirror is the response. It's the answer to this riddle. You can look at all of the expressions in the past, and really in school, this is either easy to miss or it never happens in school. The past, the Egyptian temples, the Eastern temples, the whole Taoist tradition, the Vedic tradition, it's a magic mirror. There's parts of ourselves that we can't look at directly in an ordinary conventional mirror. But imagine in a Cinderella Disney context, you have a magic mirror that shows you the parts of yourself that you can't see. You can physically look at these things with an X-ray, but you don't understand the dynamics, how the system works. So the ancient world, through this language of symbolism, that is the associative map building language, the sense making language of the right hemisphere, the temples of the past are not just architectural edifices, but they're living books that happen to be made before the invention of paper. These books, although we don't think of buildings this way in the 20th century, these buildings are books that you walk through. The walls, the structures of the temple, as we'll take a look at in a moment, these edifices are not there to get together and get panhandled by a guy in a suit. These temples in the East, the temples in ancient Egypt, are timeless structures that are literally three-dimensional structures, flowcharts, schematics of the one thing that you can't look at directly. And the one thing that we're told doesn't even exist in the 20th century. When you look at the temples, you are looking at a magic mirror that's showing you to yourself, but it's showing you to yourself in a way that shows you your true self, not just the self that shows up in the visible spectrums that our eye can see. Our magnetic selves, our plasma selves, our informational selves, we're shown all of these different registers of existence that are not denied. We absolutely exist on the magnetic register. Our bodies, we look like a giant donut on the magnetic register. There's a donut that goes around us that's measured, that you can measure electromagnetically. And when you're on a bus or when you're in a building or something, you're standing too close to other people, your magnetic torus, your magnetic donut is mixing with the donut of other people. And I used to do some work with the HeartMath Institute in Colorado, and they discovered that there's helmets and electromagnetic readers that when two people sit close enough so that they're within each other's magnetic fields, and they're wearing these brainwaves, the magnetic fields share information. So if I'm sitting with you, Justin, if I'm sitting with Venice, if I'm feeling really good and Venice is really anxious or angry at me, which almost never happens, I can feel any husband or anybody in a partnership, you've walked into a room and before any words are said, you know you're in trouble. That's a very common thing in marriages. I don't know what I did, but good God, am I in trouble?